Again, I'm Dave Scriven-Young, a lawyer focusing on litigation, environmental law, and construction law from Chicago. I'm here on Facebook Live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central for this discussion, and it is a discussion. So please liberally use the box below to ask questions or to make comments. I certainly don't sit here as any sort of expert. And on the contrary, I will be learning along with all of you, and I'm really interested in hearing your opinions and observations. I look forward to learning from all of you. And as a reminder, you can keep up with this book club and join the online discussion with our Facebook group at facebook.com/lawyersEQ and on my Twitter account, twitter.com/lawyer, slash IL EnviroLawBlog. That's um, my personal Twitter account where I not only talk about emotional intelligence, but also about environmental issues relating to Illinois, and also a big fan of the ABA, American Bar Association, Chicago Bar Association, so you'll see a lot of tweets about that as well. But you've come here to talk about Emotional Intelligence 2.0, which is our first book in the series. We're going to be talking about the Foreword and Chapter 1. And this is, I think, a really great book. I struggled for a really long time trying to figure out how to go about actually beginning and going through the actual process of increasing our emotional intelligence. And I think this is just the book for us to do that and to start with. So let's move on and let's start talking about Chapter 1 and the Foreword. And the great thing about this book is that it talks about not only how to increase emotional intelligence, but why it's important. And it's because, as we learned from the foreword of this book, that society focuses on the wrong skills to help people succeed. And I think this really, really focuses in on what we're talking about, specifically attorneys and emotional intelligence skills. So the foreword from Pat Lencioni, great author, he says the difference between education and focusing on intellectual ability as opposed to emotional intelligence. And he says from the foreword, not education, not experience, not knowledge or intellectual horsepower, none of these serve as an adequate predictor as to why one person succeeds and another doesn't. There's something else going on in that society doesn't seem to account for. And we observe supposedly brilliant and well-educated people struggle, while others with fewer obvious skills and attributes flourish. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Why is that? And the answer almost always has to do with emotional intelligence. As a society, we continue to focus most of our ability and our self-improvement energy in the pursuit of knowledge, experience, intelligence, and education. And by understanding what emotional intelligence really is and how we can manage it in our lives, we can begin to leverage all of that intelligence, education, and experience that we've been storing up for all of these years. So, again, looking at the difference between intellectual or IQ as opposed to emotional intelligence, we really see that emotional intelligence is that difference maker between people who make it and people who don't. So let's move on to our questions. And I think this is going to be sort of a quick introduction to this book. But I think we could have a really great discussion on exactly what's happening here, because I guess when I was reading this book, I thought, wow, it's interesting. What do lawyers, or how are lawyers educated as opposed to what they should be educated on, or as far as what emotional intelligence skills people should be gaining? And number one, we look at exactly what does law school focus on and measure. Well, I think anyone who's been through law school understands that law school focuses and measures, and I'm seeing that for some reason our slides aren't coming through, but that's okay. The question is, what do law schools measure and focus on? So they're going to focus and measure things like very learning the law is one big example. You sit through the first couple of years of law school, and you're focusing on things like torts and criminal law and civil procedure. You're learning how to be a lawyer, sort of the technical aspects and the substantive law. So you know exactly what arguments to make, how to apply facts to the law, and things of that nature. I think very rarely, and at least when I was in law school, and I'd love to hear others as well, but the question is, uh, does law school focus on or teach the emotional intelligence skills? Certainly not when I went to school. Um, and and to take it further, what do most programs and seminars for lawyers focus on? Again, I think the vast majority of programs talk about things like the substantive law, and especially sort of like hot topics in the area. So, for an example of that is, one of my practices is in environmental law, and the Trump administration is making vast changes into what environmental law is going to look like going forward. And that's because he essentially put in an EPA administrator that has sued EPA numerous times, and so there's going to be a changing shift in the EPA as to what regulations are going to be enforced. There are a number of court challenges actually brought by the current EPA administrator, and so essentially the programs and seminars are now focusing on, well, how do you advise your clients, and what do we think is going to happen in the Trump administration, which I think is a wonderful program. Things that are really interesting, and a really great academic exercise. But how does that really doesn't really teach emotional intelligence skills? And I think you see some CLE programs that might go to that, but very rarely do you see that. There's a few folks that are talking about mindfulness, which is an emotional intelligence skill, but certainly not to the extent that of most CLEs, programs or seminars that lawyers get invited to by bar associations or through independent programs or CLE providers. So the next question is, so what usually determines the success and failure of lawyers in private practice? Well, I think at the end of the day, very practically, what determines that success and failure is your ability to keep clients, to keep clients happy, and to gain more clients as you go along. And so, what CLEs or did law school help us to focus on that? And certainly not. And as I think we talked about in the earlier books, and especially the very first law review article that we talked about, these emotional intelligence skills are becoming more and more important, and they were important before the advent of social media. They certainly are increasingly important now with the advent of social media, and we certainly know that they are going to be even more important later on because of the advent of the various pieces of technology, robots coming into being, various very easy ways for the public to search online for various legal topics, things like ABO and the like. I'm not going to go through all of that again, but we certainly will see emotional intelligence skills being more and more important as we go along in our practice. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to our next slide, which I know is not coming up. I apologize. I certainly will make the slides available. But chapter 1 goes in and talks about the emotional intelligence and the science behind emotional intelligence. And this was this was the most interesting part to me. And so what he says is that emotional intelligence requires effective communication between the rational and emotional centers of the brain. He says that the daily challenge of dealing effectively with emotions is critical to the human condition because our brains are hardwired to give emotions the upper hand. Here's how it works. Everything you see, smell, hear, taste, and touch travels through your body in the form of electric signals. These signals pass from cell to cell until they reach their ultimate destination, your brain. They enter your brain at the base near the spinal cord, but must travel to your frontal lobe, that's behind your forehead, before reaching the place where rational, logical thinking takes place. The trouble is, they pass through your limbic system along the way, the place where emotions are produced. This journey ensures that you experience things emotionally before your reason can kick into gear. So the rational area of your brain, the front of your brain, can't stop the emotion felt by your limbic system. So you feel the emotion, and then your rational brain kicks in. And so, but the kicker here is, the punchline is that the two areas of the brain that we're talking about do influence each other and maintain constant communication. And here's the key. The communication between your emotional and rational brains is the physical source of emotional intelligence. So increasing that communication between the rational area of your brain and the emotional area of your brain is the key, and that's how we're going to increase emotional intelligence. And so, how do you increase your emotional intelligence? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in this book and in the books that are to come. Emotional Intelligence 2.0, this book that we're delving in today, has only one purpose, and that's to increase your EQ. So there's going to be various ways on how to do that, but I think the most important thing that we're going to talk about is how to measure your EQ. And that's important because you have no idea what sort of skills, and there are a lot of skills in this book if you've seen it. It's a small book, but it's a thick book. And it goes through various strategies on how to increase your EQ, but you have no idea where to start because you don't know where your benchmark is. So what they suggest is the first thing you do, and I would suggest that you do that as well. If you bought the book, there's a orange portion of the book where there's a code that you're going to be able to punch into a website and actually take what's called an emotional intelligence appraisal test that will measure your EQ and uncover the EQ skills that you need to improve the most skills, and pinpoints individual strategies to get you there. So I haven't done the test yet. I'm planning on doing it, and I will go live probably later, probably this weekend actually, to take the test, and you'll see my test as we go along. And again, this is sort of my journey into emotional intelligence. I saw something today. There was an article about, and I didn't know this until today, I guess, in The Bachelor, a few Bachelor episodes ago. I don't watch it, but I heard that there's a big discussion on emotional intelligence. And there's this one, woman talking to this other woman, and she was saying how she's not emotionally intelligent and doesn't have social skills, and that's why she's not ready for a relationship, which I thought was pretty funny, given the book club that we're doing. But so the funny thing was, I thought to myself, wow, that's really weird. I never really thought of telling someone, wow, you don't really have great emotional intelligence skills. And I certainly wouldn't. What I'm focused on is sort of my journey and how to increase my own emotional intelligence. And what I'm hoping that all of you will be able to do is sort of come along for the ride. You'll be able to see my emotional intelligence test. I'll be coming along with various vlogs to sort of update everyone on how things are going. But I really want to hear from all of you as well, because it's important for me to sort of understand how you're doing as well. So I can't we can't in this book club segment out, what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, but you'll be able to sort of see my journey, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And hopefully you'll be able to pick up some things as well. So anyway, a long way of saying there's this emotional intelligence appraisal test. You'll be able to take it if you bought the book. If not, you'll be able to see me do it. Number 2, there's an online report that tracks goals with reminders. Then there are 66 strategies in the book, which I think is probably the most important part of this. So you'll be able to see exactly what's happening, what your benchmarks are, where your strengths and weaknesses are in terms of emotional intelligence. They'll give you some goals online, and then you'll be able to look at 66 strategies in this book that essentially are the specifics as to what to say, do, and think to increase your emotional intelligence. And then so what I'm planning on doing, just so everyone knows as we go along, is so each of these strategies, once you get into the strategies. So chapter 5 starts with self-awareness strategies, right? And so there's various things on what to do. So the first strategy is quit treating your feelings as good or bad. So what I'm planning on doing is finding a book that will go with each of these strategies. So I know some of the strategies are like listening strategies, for example. Some of them are things like mindfulness. There's a great mindfulness book that I think her name is Jeannie Cho has written, especially for lawyers, that I think people will really like, and we'll go through that. There's one of the strategies I just flipped to is step into their shoes. So empathy, for example, there's a great book on empathy. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of these strategies and then do a deep dive into a book that will talk about these strategies. And so this is really going to be our Bible, if you will, but our text that we're going to start with, and then we're going to go along and see how we're doing. And that's how we're going to come up with our titles. And then the great part about this is, once we get through, so, maybe, I know this sounds a little insane, but, maybe a year from now, you will be able to talk about, you'll be able to retake the test. So take the test a second time to see how your EQ score has increased over time. So hopefully one of the great things about this book club is that you'll be able to look at your benchmark through the test in this book, and then later on, a year, 2 years later, you'll be able to go online and see how your score has increased over time. So that's the plan. That's what we're planning on doing for this book and for our books to come. I'm really excited to see what my emotional intelligence score is going to be. We'll see what that is, and we'll go from there. So I'm just going to leave you with one quote, which is from the book, from chapter 1. That emotions can help you and they can hurt you, but you have no say in the matter until you understand them. We invite you to begin the journey now because we know that emotional mastery and understanding can be realities for you. And so that's going to do it, I think, for today's session. I know, I say this every time. We have some technical glitches. And so I'm gonna work on them. I promise. I don't know if it's like internet connection or just glitches that happen, but that's okay. Obviously, you'll be able to see this video on Facebook, on Twitter. I'm gonna put it on my YouTube account, which again is youtube.com/ILandViralLawBlog. So check me out at those sites. I'm also on Instagram and on Snapchat at IL and Viral Law Blog as well. So we are going to sign off for now. The next discussion of the book is going to be Chapter 2, talking about emotional intelligence. And that is going to be on March 15th at 7 p.m. Central at facebook.com/lawyerseq. So that's all I have for you for now. Thanks again for joining me tonight. Hope to see you at 7 p.m. Central next Wednesday night as well. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.